Today is Sunday, the 26th of April. It's the day that the ceasefire between the US and Iran ends. We expected that by Thursday night, Friday night, the US would restart their war with Iran, but that has not yet to come, which actually is a good sign. I want to go into what we expect to happen in the next couple of days, especially as the ceasefire ends. Now, 4 days ago, we published a video saying that by Thursday night, Friday night, we're expecting something to happen because a couple of reasons. Number one, we were waiting for the USS Bush, which is the third U.S. aircraft carrier to be deployed in the Middle East. That was confirmed by CENTCOM that on Thursday night, the USS Bush is now in position to carry out its strikes. It joins the Abraham Lincoln, which is already in the Arabian Sea. And you've got the Gerald Ford, which is now in the Red Sea in case of Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, blocking Bab el-Mandeb to the Red Sea. We also noted that the Powers Act, which restricts Trump from continuing the war, it requires basically after you start a war, even though they're saying it's not a war, that after 60 days, Congress has to approve its continuation. Well, the 60-day mark is on Wednesday, the 29th of April. So that's just in 3 days. So if you want to start the war, you got to do something now before that time comes. We also mentioned the third thing was that the weather, it's getting really hot right now in the Middle East. In Dubai, in the UAE, it's about 35, 36 degrees. It's going to reach 40 degrees very soon. And it's very hard to operate from a personnel perspective, from an equipment perspective at that temperature. You get into summer, you're looking at 50 degrees Celsius. That's pretty much torture if you have to wear all the equipment to operate. And also on the 14th of May, we have Trump meeting Xi in China. And so Trump wants to kind of conclude this before he goes to China. He's already postponed this meeting once because of this war. I doubt he wants to postpone it again. All of this indicated that this week we would expect the war to restart, especially after we've seen a lot of deployment from the US and Europe of flights going to the Middle East, going to Israel to rearm, to resupply, to get ready for the restart of the war. Now, currently, the US has more assets in the Middle East to restart the war than before it started the war on the 28th of February. So everything on the ground is saying they're preparing for war. They've used these 2-3 weeks of ceasefire to rearm, to resupply as expected. And Iran is obviously doing the same thing. There's a lot of cargoes coming from China, from other places we don't know what's on the cargo. It could be defense systems, it could be ammunition, it could be a lot of things. Now, the thing that delayed the ceasefire, which was supposed to end on Wednesday, was this hope of negotiation between the US and Iran. But Iran said that we're not going to negotiate with the US, the second round of negotiation, if there is a US blockade. And Trump has issued a US blockade of Iran. This means that any ship that ports in Iran that's coming out of Iran or going to Iran, the US Navy is going to stop it from leaving or entering and possibly board the ship. And we've seen some instances of that. But the reality is that a lot of those ships that are coming from Iran or going to Iran are bypassing this US blockade. There are 3 reasons why Trump hasn't restarted the war with Iran. Number one, he thinks the US blockade that they're doing right now is going to put enough pressure on Iran such that they will surrender. Number two, he actually thinks that Iran is going to negotiate and come to the table to make a deal with Trump. And number three, he's possibly also waiting for high-ranking Iranian officials to actually come together so that he can do a strike to put even more pressure on Iran. In the same way of how they started the war on the 28th of Feb by killing the Ayatollah Khamenei with high-ranking officials. Trump's philosophy is attack, attack, attack by putting a lot of pressure to get a good deal. And even if it means killing people so that they can accept your terms, so be it. That's his mindset. Now, the US blockade isn't going to work because, as we've seen, a lot of Iranian ships are bypassing this blockade. This was in the Financial Times. Iranian tankers bypass US blockade. At least 34 tankers, this is on the 21st of April, at least 34 tankers with links to Iran have bypassed the US blockade since it began, according to the cargo tracking group Vortexa, including several carrying Iranian oil. despite US President Trump declaring the blockade a tremendous success. Now, the US forces have so far detained one container ship in the Gulf of Oman and boarded a sanctioned tanker in the Indo-Pacific. And it says the US Central Command said on Tuesday the US Navy had directed 28 vessels to turn back to Iranian ports since the blockade began. However, as this confirms, at least 34 tankers have bypassed the US blockade. Now, the problem is that it's very hard to do a blockade when you are very far off from Iran. Now, the USS Bush, the USS Abraham Lincoln are at least 400 kilometers away from the borders of Iran, because Iran can easily throw hypersonic ballistic missiles at the ships, at the aircraft carriers, so they have to be far away. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is over here, but a lot of the US Navy is around here in the Arabian Sea, and it's a very large area. This is more than 1,500 kilometers, nearly 1,000 miles. And so to actually kind of do a whole blockade in this area, you're going to require a lot more equipment and destroyers and aircraft carriers to do this. And the US hasn't deployed enough for such a blockade. So a lot of tankers are going to bypass this blockade. Now, he still thinks that Iran is going to negotiate with the US, even though Iran has made it very clear that as long as there is the US blockade, they're not going to negotiate with the US, because that goes against the ceasefire. Now, Trump is pushing this idea that the reason why they're not negotiating the Iranians is because they're fractured. The leadership is kind of fighting between each other. We've even seen reports in the US media that the IRGC has put Araghchi, the foreign minister, on house arrest, and the president on house arrest, even though we just saw that Araghchi went to Islamabad and now is going to Oman and then is going to Russia. So he's clearly not on house arrest. And he's making it look like that's why, we're not getting a deal, because the Iranians themselves cannot decide on the next steps forward. Now, of course, in the Iranian leadership, there's going to be different opinions about how to approach this, whether to get into a deal, whether to restart the war. In the same way that the American leadership, there's also different views about how to approach this. Since before the war, some newspapers have indicated that Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance was against this war, but Trump listened to the Israeli intelligence about how easy it's going to be to do this war, and there's going to be a regime change very quickly, which is why Trump really started this war. He thought it was going to be an easy win. One thing about Trump, looking at everything he's done in Venezuela and other places, he wants to quick in and out. His ego is very big. He cares about his legacy. He doesn't want a prolonged war, even though now it is becoming a more prolonged war. He wants easy wins. And the reason why he entered into this is because the Israelis said that this is going to be an easy win, that Iran is weak, that millions and millions, the majority of Iranians are going to rise up in the streets and take over as soon as the war started. Just kill the leadership. That's what we were told. But it didn't materialize. The Iranian government is stronger than before the war, because now people are rallying around the flag. They see that there's a foreign country trying to destroy their country. And so they're defending their country, even if they are not supportive of the Iranian government. That's typically what happens in a war, when a foreign country attacks your country. But Iran had also thousands and thousands of missiles and drones that it wasn't using before the war, because it's clear now that they didn't want a war with the US, but they had those assets, and it's deploying those assets right now. And everyone's kind of saying that Araghchi, the foreign minister, came out and said the Strait of Hormuz is open, back to normal to before the war. Well, that's not exactly what he said. Araghchi said that in line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, the passage for all commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of the ceasefire on the coordinated route, as already announced by the Ports and Maritime Organization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The coordinated route means you have to go through Iranian waters, through the Iranian passage that they have indicated is the only way to enter and exit the Strait of Hormuz. From the Iranian perspective, they don't trust the US, and they know that the US is rearming and resupplying. So they need to make sure that everything that's going into the Middle East from the Strait of Hormuz isn't weapons, isn't stuff that is going to help them, help the US with the war. And so, all the routes, we're not going to go back to the pre-war situation, especially during a ceasefire where the war hasn't even ended yet. And they've indicated that they will still apply a toll fee. Now, we don't know what was negotiated in the ceasefire between the US and Iran, but it's very clear that Iran is never going to accept going back to pre-war, especially when the war hasn't ended yet. They were always going to indicate that any passage has to go through the Strait of Hormuz, and they're going to have to assess what they will allow in and out based on the security for the Iranians. That's the Iranian perspective. It's understandable. So Trump, following that, he announced a US blockade of Iran. Now, obviously that goes against the ceasefire. I mean, from the beginning, the Americans went against the ceasefire because part of the ceasefire agreement was that the ceasefire encompasses Lebanon too. That was noted by the Pakistani prime minister. It was noted by the Iranians. And suddenly the US came out and said, no, Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire, because what seems to have happened is that Trump agreed this, and then he went to Benjamin Netanyahu, and Benjamin Netanyahu said, we're not going to abide by that. And so Trump had to backtrack on that. And it took more than a week to agree that Lebanon is included as part of that ceasefire, but it wasn't going to include Hezbollah, which was against the ceasefire. The ceasefire included everything in Lebanon. And even during that ceasefire with Lebanon, the Israelis were still attacking parts of Lebanon. So from the Iranian perspective, of course they don't trust the US. I mean, don't forget, they were negotiating with the US when the US in last year killed the negotiating team with Israel. And this year, again, they were negotiating and they killed their leadership of Iran while they're negotiating with Iran. So the Iranians have zero trust with the US, and then they entered into a ceasefire, and the US immediately went against the ceasefire. And so the Iranians have said very clear, as long as there's a US blockade, we're not going to negotiate with the US. And it's funny because, Arachi, the foreign minister of Iran, said he's going to Pakistan, but he said, we're not going to go there to engage with the US directly in direct talks. We're going to kind of go to Pakistan, tell Pakistan why we cannot negotiate, and here are our terms to enter into the negotiation, and then we're going to go to Oman, and then we're going to go to Russia. But Trump is jumping on anything to indicate that there are negotiations, such that he said, we're sending Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Pakistan because the foreign minister is there of Iran, so we're going to get into negotiation, even though Iran said they're not negotiating with the US. And then when the foreign minister Arachi left Pakistan, Trump said to Witkoff and Jared, okay, don't go there. So he keeps on thinking that putting more pressure on Iran is going to make them surrender to all his demands. And he said it very clearly, I want all my demands met. No enrichment. Removal of the 60% enriched uranium from Iran and given to the US. Open the Strait of Hormuz. Destroy your nuclear facilities that you have. Limit your ballistic missile range so that it's not a threat to Israel. That's basically Iran surrendering. Now, why would Iran do that? Given that now they have the Strait of Hormuz, they have actually more leverage than before, and it's clear that they can retaliate against American attacks. Trump's view is that by putting that US blockade in there is going to have, it's kind of another level of economic sanctions on Iran. But Iran's been facing economic sanctions since 1979 by the US. Do you think they can withstand a few more months of economic sanctions versus the US now facing and Europe facing economic sanctions by Iran through closing the Strait of Hormuz, or not allowing their ships to transit the Strait of Hormuz, but allowing other countries that are friendly to Iran to transit their ships? It's clear that the Iranians can stand longer with this economic sanctions than the US can. We're seeing gas prices go up. Jet fuel is very soon going to be out. A lot of airlines are saying they're not going to be flying. They're canceling trips because there isn't enough jet fuel. So, a few more weeks of that, and we're going to see more price increases in terms of oil and gas, and more pressure political pressure, especially economic pressure, of course, being put on Trump to do something, because he cannot just wait out, have this US blockade for another couple of weeks while the US economy suffers. Now, we're not seeing the US economy suffer from a stock prices and stuff like that have gone back to pre-war. But the reality is that the people are going to be suffering more and more in the US because of these higher prices they have to pay now in terms of food, in terms of transport, oil, all those things. And by the way, during this whole period of war, supply has still been reaching, Europe and America and Asian countries, because it takes, in some instances, more than 45 days, 50 days from when a ship leaves the Middle East to reaching, for example, the US, where, by the way, the US still imports oil from the Middle East, because even though it's a net exporter, it has a lot of refineries in the US where it needs, it's kind of specific, those refineries, to turn raw oil into usable oil. It needs Middle Eastern oil for those refineries to turn them into usable oil, because before the shale gas revolution, the US built its refineries based on getting most of its oil from the Middle East. So it still imports oil, and that's why we're also seeing an increase in gas and oil prices in the Middle East, in the US, even though it's a net exporter. But what's also clear is that Trump is hesitant. He clearly doesn't want more casualties. He doesn't want things more destroyed, because he cares about his legacy. His ego is huge. He cares about how he's viewed. And, the reason why he entered in this war is because, as we said, he thought it was a clear win. Now, restarting the war, now knowing everything that he knows about Iran, he knows that restarting the war is going to result in a lot of casualties. There's more U.S. troops now deployed in the Middle East than before the war. There's more USS aircraft carriers than before the war. There's more warships than before the war. And the U.S. is running very low on a lot of ammunition. This is a report from the New York Times. It says Iran war has drained U.S. supplies of critical, costly weapons. Since the Iran war began in late February, the United States has burned through around 1,100 of its long-range stealth cruise missiles built for a war with China. And it's close to the total number remaining in the U.S. stockpile. Close to the total number remaining in the U.S. stockpile. That means it's used most of its long-range stealth cruise missiles already in a 40-day war with Iran. The military has fired off more than 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles, roughly 10 times the number it currently buys each year. This is 10 times the number it buys each year. It means basically it's used 10 years supply of its Tomahawk cruise missiles. These are crazy numbers. This is just in 40 days. The Pentagon used more than 1,200 Patriot interceptor missiles in the war, at more than $4 million a pop, 1,000 precision strikes, ground-based missiles. The Iran war has significantly drained much of the U.S. military's global supply of munitions and forced the Pentagon to rush bombs, missiles, and other hardware to the Middle East from commands in Asia and Europe. And these drawdowns have left these regional commands less ready to confront potential adversaries like Russia and China. Now, the Pentagon has committed most of its inventory of stealthy, long-range cruise missiles to the fight against Iran. These missiles, called Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile Extended Range, or JASSM-ER, are launched from fighters and bombers and have a range of more than 600 miles. They're designed to penetrate hard targets outside the range of enemy air defenses. Since the war started, the military has used about 1,100 of those JASSM-ER missiles, which cost rough $1.1 million apiece, leaving roughly 1,500 in the military's inventories, according to the internal Pentagon estimates. A U.S. military official and a congressional official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss confidential combat assessments. Now, more than 600 miles. We've been saying that a lot of these fighter jets, they're not going deep into Iran, even though the bombs are falling deep into Iran. This is Tehran. And the fighter jets, when they come over here, this is 700 kilometers to Tehran from this position, which is about 440 miles. 440 miles, and those JASSM-ERs extend more than 600 miles. So you don't need to go inside Iran to, hit targets in Tehran, which is where most of the targets were hit. And this kind of is the area where a lot of the air fighters fell. If you remember, in Kuwait, 3 fell, apparently friendly fire. There was the downed airmen was around this area over here. So it seems like America isn't actually going deep into Iran to carry out those strikes. And when they do, the Iranian defense systems seem to be working, where they are hitting these air jets. And, during that operation of rescuing the 2 airmen that fell into Iran, that day, in those 24 hours, the U.S. lost, it was the most downed air equipment in one day, in 124 hours since the Vietnam War, because obviously they had to go into Iranian territory to rescue those airmen. So Trump has two choices. He's either going to restart the war, and if he's going to restart the war, the ceasefire ends today. I'd be surprised if he starts a war when the stock market is going to open, tomorrow, because he cares about those kind of things. So it could be maybe on, Friday night when the stock market closes, and that's his last chance to really do this, because the weather's changing. As we said, it's going to be much more difficult to kind of carry out those attacks. The longer you continue this war, the more pressure there is in terms of inflation hitting normal people, everyday people in the US, in Europe, and other places. Or he's going to have to take a step back from demanding surrender from Iranians. He's going to have to demand less things to get into a deal with the Iranians. And the problem he has is that he needs to get a better deal than Obama did with the JCPOA in 2015-16, which Trump ripped apart, the nuclear agreement that they had with Iran. And he ripped it apart because he said it's a bad deal. Obama did it. And so he has to get into a better deal than that. And that deal didn't have destroying the nuclear facilities. That deal, of course, Iran didn't control the Strait of Hormuz back then, so he has to get that into a deal. The Iranians under that deal could enrich uranium up to 3.5%, which he has been saying that that's a bad deal. And so those are the least things that he needs to give away in terms of allowing the Iranians to enrich their uranium to 3.5%. But also, given that the Iranians have now the Strait of Hormuz, he's going to have to include a lot of other things, like sanction relief. He's going to have to give up the, limiting the range of Iranian ballistic missiles. That wasn't part of the deal back then. And it's very difficult to see him backtrack on that. So the more likelihood outcome is he's going to restart the war. However, there might be some logic left in Trump where he's going to say, actually, this is going to cause a lot more deaths, US deaths, from the military perspective. And it's an unwinnable war. After 40 days, and we just detailed all the ammunitions that they've used, are you really going to deplete everything you've got in Iran and make yourself defenseless against China and Russia? And people say, China's being hurt by this. China's loving this. It's basically, looking at the situation in Iran and saying Iran is depleting all of the US's military high-tech ammunitions, which would have been used against China in case of situations such as, Taiwan, China taking Taiwan, or any of those circumstances. Because let's not forget that China and the US are pretty much at war. It's not a kinetic war, but it's an economic war. It's a technological war where they're trying to fight each other because the US sees China as the rising power. And the more China rises relative to the US kind of obviously falls behind, and the US is going to do everything in its power to limit China's rise. And it's trying to do that with Venezuela. It's trying to do that with Iran too. And of course, Russia is loving this because oil prices are very high up. They're earning a lot more now than before the war. And a lot of the ammunition that used to go to Ukraine, to Europe, is now being diverted to the Middle East. And so for Russia, it's a great deal. Let me know your thoughts about whether you think Trump is going to restart the war, or he's going to backtrack and give a bit more concessions to get into a negotiated deal with Iran. If you did like this video, do hit the like and subscribe, and see you very soon.